Hello and welcome to Fade to PB8. In this episode, we'll be coloring in Hyrule Castle from the Legend of Zelda series. I'll go ahead and rewind. I'll walk you through step by step, let you know what my thought process was, and how I achieved the colors that I ended up with. Hope you enjoy. Thank you. So I start with the background, specifically the clouds. And when I do the clouds, I want this to be a very bright blue sky, and I want the clouds to be as white as possible, but I don't want to use the white of the paper. So what I do is I start with the blender marker before I put down my colors for the clouds, and by putting the blender marker down, it helps line up the colors before they ever even hit the paper. For the clouds, I do kind of like a yellow on the top, followed by a very light gray in the middle, and then a light gray blue at the bottom. And it looks really nice, so it's a combination that I suggest you try. So for the sky, I do a fade. I go light to dark as I go from bottom to top, or in other words, at the horizon, it's going to be a lot lighter than it is closer to us. And it's a simple fade, but what I want you to notice here is that I kind of split it up doing the left section and then the right section. That's because of this flagpole. Now what I do when I'm working on the right section, I keep the leading edge of the left side wet. When I bring the left and the right together, I want to be merging wet ink. I don't want to be merging wet ink onto dry ink. So I just keep the leading edge of the left side wet as I'm working on the right side. And all you have to do is just pass over it every, 30, 60 seconds or so. Just do one quick pass through and that'll keep it wet. So I want kind of like a reddish tone to the mountains and the castle itself. So I come in with this very light red on the bright side of the mountain. I have my light source to the left. Normally I do it to the right because I'm right-handed. It's usually a little bit easier that way, but this time I decided to do it a little bit differently. Now I like to use the brush tip versus the chisel tip. I find that the brush tip is better for blending inks together. You can get very fine with it if you just push very, very lightly. Whereas the chisel tip, it's much harder to blend with the chisel tip, and the chisel tip can kind of damage the paper too a little bit if you push too hard. But what the chisel tip is really good for is actually lightening up wet ink. So if you go in with the marker that's too dark and the ink is still wet, you can go in with a lighter marker, use the chisel tip, and actually push into the paper. And I think what you're really doing is kind of pushing that dark ink into the paper and then creating a lighter layer on top of it, which is the layer that you end up seeing. So for these bushes, I actually end up going over them twice. And the reason I do that is I didn't think I had enough contrast, enough shadow in them. So I had finished them, the bushes in the front, on the left and the right. I took a break, I came back, and I said, you know what, it's just too monotone. I hit my highlights with that yellow marker fairly well, but I just didn't hit the shadows enough. So you can go over a section a second time after it dries, but just keep in mind a few things. Number one, you can't really go lighter once the ink is dried. Number two is that it's a little tougher to guess what the end result is going to be like if you're going over ink that's already dried. And that's because when you put the ink down on the paper and it's wet, it lines up as it dries. So if you're putting it down on ink that's already dry, that fresh ink is going to appear much darker than the ink that's already there. Even though it might be the same exact color, it's going to appear much different. And so if you end up going over the section you've already done, just keep in mind that it's a little bit tougher to tell what the end result's going to look like. But just try to keep using the same markers, and I think you can get a good result. So when I do the highlighter with the yellow, a lot of times I'll hit my highlights the first thing I do, because I like to start light and end dark. Then I'll go over with my base green and then scatter different greens around and scatter darker greens around and then darker greens. And then I'll hit my highlighter again. And then I'll bring it all together with a light green. And then I'll hit the highlighter for a third time. Those light colors, you kind of have to apply them multiple times in order for them to stick out. Now, like a dark color is going to dominate, so you don't really need a lot of the dark ink. But the lighter colors, you really do have to kind of like dig them into the paper and kind of blur them in. So if you're like me, you end up using a lot more ink of your lighter markers than you do your dark markers. So those pastel sets that Ohuhu sells, those come in handy because you just, with my technique at least, you end up using a lot more of the lighter colors. So this image is AI generated, and you might notice it looks like there's kind of like some leaves or some stones in the grass, but the lines are really light, and I decided to just kind of go over them with the green marker and see what it would look like. And you can't really notice them. In fact, it kind of looks like it's adding texture. So AI is a lot of fun to work with. I think for this one, I just typed in Hyrule Castle from Zelda series, and it came up with this, and it looks great. But just be careful because with the AI generated images, a lot of the times there's an extra finger, three limbs, one limb, birds with their head on backwards, things like that. So just know that the AI is not perfect, but it is a lot of fun, and I think it's more fun than kind of browsing through coloring books trying to find the right page because you're essentially creating the page yourself. So I use a hairdryer sometimes to dry out the paper. Just be careful with the hairdryer that you don't dry it too much because you might end up damaging the paper. Just get it about 90% dry and let the rest air dry. So for the castle, I really wanted to avoid being monotone, and I want to try to get like each tile or stone to look slightly different. And you can't see it above my screen, but I've actually picked out probably about 20 or 30 markers, and I'm going to kind of scatter them a little bit. And I'm starting off with this grayish color. I'm starting off with the grays and just kind of working my way light. Start with the lightest marker, then my second lightest, and the third lightest, and so on. And I'm just kind of scattering those grays around. I'll hit the darker, like the shadow areas with the darker grays a little bit more than I would with the lights. But as you see, the lights are becoming, the colors are becoming scattered. And that's what I want. It's the castle's slowly coming to life. It's slowly becoming three-dimensional. And as I work on it more, it actually becomes easier because I can start to see it in 3 dimensions instead of 2. So when I come in with these next colors, so after the grays, I come in with these light yellow reds or these reds. And I try to make each tile look a little bit different, so I kind of just scatter all the colors a little bit. And essentially what I'm doing is coming up with probably hundreds, if not 1,000 different combinations of colors, even with just like 20 markers, because I'm scattering them. And I might mix marker A with marker C with marker G, and then in this other area it might be A with C with I, and that will give you a different color combination, a different result, even though you've just used a few different markers. And you just keep doing that, just kind of scattering and coming up with different combinations. And then each tile will look slightly different, but the colors will be really, really close. But we want them to be close. We want them to look like they go together. So now I'm coming in with this yellow, this orangish, yellowish color. And I'm still not like 100% certain like what the final color is going to be like. I know I want like a hint of red because I kind of want it to match the mountains in the background, but I'm going to save that red for a little bit later. Right now I'm still just establishing like different colors, and this is kind of what I do. I start light, I go dark, and I kind of I might have like 3 or 4 different palettes. Like let's say I have a palette of the grays, then the yellow reds and the reds, and then like my browns. And I'll start with the grays and I'll go light to dark. And then I'll start with the yellow reds and I'll go light to dark. And then I'll go with the reds and go light to dark. And then the brown and light to dark. So it's always light to dark. Just mixing things up on the paper itself. And then when I've kind of gone through all those markers and established my base, the colors might be actually too far apart. So then you come in with like a base color. And your base color should be a lighter color. And you can kind of go over everything, and that'll kind of bring all the colors together. So with the lighter markers, once you've used them, so yeah, we start with the light marker, then we go a little bit darker. And if you add that light marker again, it won't really make much difference. But you can still use the light marker as a blender. So like when I did the bushes, I worked those darker greens into the shadows. And then I brought it all together with that light green. and just kind of use that as my blending tool, even though it didn't really change the color, especially of the shadows, because that dark green dominates so much. So you'll notice, I want you to look at the roof of these. I'm going over the roof and I'm going over the castle, all with the same exact colors. But all I'm going to do with the roof at the very end is come in with a cool gray, and that will change the color. But since it's shared so many of those common colors before, it makes it look like it goes together. I didn't treat the roof completely separate from the rest of the drawing. And frankly, I wish I had done that with the door and this Zelda logo in front. Because the one part of the drawing I wasn't terribly happy with was the Zelda logo, and that's the part that you end up seeing first because it's right dead square in the middle of the page. So here I just came in with the cool grays, and you can see how the color changed, and yet it still all goes together. So now I'm doing the door, and like I said, I wish I had used those same colors, gone over the door and that logo at the same time. You could see that I used the blender marker there, so I actually went a little too dark, and you can use the blender marker to come back in and lighten things up. It works well. You just have to be careful not to oversaturate the paper, as the blending marker does tend to cause the ink to bleed quite a lot. And look at the color of the logo. Look how it changes. I started a little too orange, and I added some reds. And right now the logo itself is a little bit wet, so I come up to work on the flags and let it dry a little bit. And then I just let it dry a little bit, and just kind of compare it to its surroundings. Make sure it tries to fit in. And at this point, I'm not terribly happy with how that centerpiece looks. But what I'm going to try to do is come up with another marker and make it just blend in with its background. And then it just won't really stick out as much. It won't be something that really grabs your attention compared to the entire castle itself. So if you mess up, that's okay. Work with your mistakes and see if you can just get things to, at the very least, go together, and so that it won't grab your attention. Because if you look at like any piece of work, chances are they've made some mistakes, but hopefully those mistakes aren't grabbing your attention. So that pretty much wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed and learned something. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you again.